This is the One Girl Revolution podcast, a podcast that highlights the stories of world-changing women and girls across the country. We hope that these stories inspire you, but even more so, we hope that these stories help you to see your own value, your purpose, and your power to change the world through your life. Every woman and girl is a One Girl Revolution. On this week's episode of the One Girl Revolution podcast, we welcome Jenny Barber, a survivor of exploitation and co-founder of Talitha Coffee, a coffee company that is dedicated to bringing an end to human trafficking and exploitation in our world and helping survivors find community, healing, and a pathway to freedom. Jenny is a true warrior and survivor of exploitation who has transformed her life's journey into a powerful example to others and a company and movement for change. After overcoming unimaginable challenges, Jenny dedicated her life to raising awareness and bringing an end to human trafficking and exploitation in our world, and helping survivors find freedom. Jenny co-founded Talitha with her husband, a business with a purpose to provide employment, empowerment, and a safe space for survivors like herself. Through Talitha Coffee, Jenny is helping other survivors find community, support, and a path to freedom, all while raising awareness about exploitation and human trafficking. In this episode, we dive into Jenny's personal story, the founding of Talitha Coffee, and the impact it's making in the lives of so many. Get ready to be inspired by Jenny's courage, her strength, and her unwavering commitment to turning pain into purpose. Here's my conversation with Jenny. Jenny, welcome to the One Girl Revolution podcast.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
I'm so excited to have you on to talk about your own story, to talk about Talitha Coffee. As I mentioned to you before we started recording, I'm sitting here drinking my Talitha coffee and it's delicious. So I can't wait to talk about that and all the great work that you're doing to spread awareness about human trafficking and uplifting survivors. You're doing so much great work. And I know human trafficking is such a personal topic to you, and that you and your husband have really dedicated your lives to raising awareness and also just working with survivors and elevating their voices and their stories. And you're just doing so much great work. Before we get into all the work that you do, and before we get into Talitha, I would love to rewind and just have you share a little bit about your own story. You're a survivor of human trafficking yourself, as I understand it, and it started as familial human trafficking. What can you share about your early life, and what can you share about that experience?
So I actually say that I am a survivor of sexual exploitation. Trafficking is such a complex issue and often involves the harboring and moving of people and things like that. But my situation was very different in the fact that it was exploitation that I faced, and just a lot of abuse from a really young age. So I have been working in anti-trafficking for about almost 15 years now. And that really did come from this place of passion for me. So I experienced exploitation from a very, very young age, and I was exposed to the issue with other people being trafficked and exploited around me from a very, very young age. And so with that, I think there was this opportunity, right, that I was facing such tragic things in my life and had just faced a ton of abuse and exploitation. And I knew that I could really succumb to that, or I could choose to rise above and find freedom and bring others along for that journey as well. And so my childhood definitely had a huge impact on my identity and my self-worth and all of that. And I think there was this wrestle of who am I, and kind of wondering, like, was this all that I was put on this earth for? Like, am I just kind of determined to face grief and tragedy and exploitation and abuse, or is there something more for me? And I definitely have memories from a young age of having to kind of decide which mindset I was going to partner with. And so as I found freedom in my own life, I really kind of developed this tenacity and this grit of, I want to see others find freedom as well. And this is not going to be my story, and I am going to overcome this. And so Yeah, that's really kind of what got me started on this path was just personal experience, but also seeing people exploited and trafficked around me as well.
Your story is like so many others. I think women are so resilient. We're so strong. We're stronger than we know, but it really comes down to a choice often, right? Do you want to be the victim or the victor of your story of things that have happened to you? And I think it's so important that you share your story and like how you've just found healing. And I know that healing is a daily journey that we deal with our whole lives, right? You don't just move beyond trauma or exploitation, you carry it with you and you have like really risen above it. You've overcome so much and found so much healing. How did you find healing and how did you overcome it? Or is it kind of back to what you were saying, just how you had to make that choice?
It was almost like there was this pattern, right? You could see that I was kind of born into a lot of I was born into a pretty extreme environment. And so with that, there was a lot of tragedy all around me and there were things that I was facing, but it almost was like there were these hooks that were kind of gripping me. And as I grew and got older, I was 6 years old when I was adopted, and even despite being adopted, I continued to face things where it was like this thing just kept hooking me back into exploitation. And whether it was a neighbor or whether it was other family members or things like that, it just continued to come after me. And so I remember though, from a really young age, my adopted mom, who is just like she's a total spitfire. I remember her telling me, I would say things, and she would say to me, "That sounds like a victim mindset," and asking me and challenging me, "Who do you want to be?" And it wasn't that she wasn't having empathy for me. She definitely had a lot of compassion and empathy and understanding from where I was coming from. But at the same time, she really instilled in me that I had a choice, that I could decide who I wanted to be and how I wanted to think and approach life and all of that. And so, when it took a long time for that to click though, right? Because I'm growing up and this thing continues to get its hooks in me and it was almost like you're like, is this real? How do I continue to fall back into this? And by the time I was late in high school, I fell into addiction and really fell into all the things that come along with that. And exploitation continued in my life. And I had a point in my life of hitting absolute rock bottom and crying out to God and saying, "If you get me through this, I will serve you with the rest of my life." I was terrified, and I fell asleep and woke up the next morning and called my mom, and I said, "Please come find me, because I don't want to live this life anymore." And it was like this moment where all of the things that had been building up to this point began to click for me. I also had a lot of people in my life that continued to call out my value and my self-worth and continued to show up for me. I had people from the church that would just leave their door unlocked, because if I ever needed something or a place to land, the door was open, right? And I could go shower or go get a meal or whatever it was. And they just knew, maybe I was being a wild teenager, but there were always places to come home to. And I think that was really important. And as I found freedom in my life, I really wanted to become that for other people. I wanted to create places where people could, find a sense of belonging. I think that as we feel a sense of belonging, that is really what changes our belief system, and what changes behavior and mentalities and all of that. And so, yeah, I wanted to create those places for other people as well.
Well, you are doing it. And I know you've done it in so many different ways because of your own experiences and also because you're so aware of how prevalent sexual exploitation and human trafficking is in our world. You and your husband have really dedicated your lives to being advocates and supporters of survivors and bringing an end to this exploitation, bringing an end to human trafficking. Before we get into Talitha and all the great work that you're doing with your incredible coffee company, what can you tell me about the other work that you and your husband have done? I know that you've been involved in a lot of nonprofits. You've been very savvy in utilizing different opportunities to really raise awareness and be advocates for survivors. What can you tell me about that?
Yeah, so my husband and I jumped into this whole anti-trafficking world really early on. So we got married at 19, and I knew that there was a mission that I was on, and I'm like, "Hey, this like come and join me. Let's do this together." And so we actually found ourselves on an overseas trip to Thailand, and on that trip, that's where my husband saw trafficking for the first time. We had been invited in northern Thailand to kind of help pioneer some work that was happening in the red light districts. And as we were going into this new area that not many people have been into, my husband saw a young Thai girl sitting on an American married man's lap. And it was this moment for him. We were just starting our own family. He knew all of the things that I had overcome in my life. And he was just like, I see this as an issue that's, yes, affecting victims, but this is also breaking down family. And this is like a war on family. And so that was really his defining moment. From there, we moved down to Los Angeles. So we had that moment of like, this is what we're doing. We're all in, like, there is no turning back. And so we moved down to Los Angeles to join an organization that was doing work with anti-trafficking. And because of some extenuating circumstances, it wasn't very long before we found ourselves leading that work that was happening. And so through that, we just decided, we're like, okay, we need to take every opportunity we can to learn. Like, we need to go after every educational pathway there is. We need to really make sure that we're equipped as we pursue this work. And so whether it was social services or law enforcement or the local university, whatever it was, we signed up to go and to just learn, what is human trafficking? What does it look like stateside? This isn't a far off issue that's just affecting people overseas. This is happening at home. And how do we create effective ways to combat that? So through that, we also began to find out who was doing the work and partner with incredible organizations around Los Angeles County and kind of just show up. Whatever they needed, we showed up, whether it was sending donor letters or, cleaning offices. Like, we were just there to serve however we could. And I think through that, people began to learn more about who we were, and the invitation to kind of pioneer new initiatives began to come up. And so we started to identify places around Los Angeles where there wasn't work happening. And maybe it was because the places were, known for violence, or maybe they're kind of overlooked, but we launched our outreach initiatives in those areas and began providing outreach and advocacy to victims of trafficking, and also had the opportunity to do work all over the world and help other organizations with their outreach strategies and initiatives, and kind of either bring strength or help pioneer different things. My husband started roasting coffee in 2015. And he did so on a popcorn popper on our stovetop. And it was kind of a funny moment, because we realized, he made his first batch of coffee. I'll never forget it. And we called friends over, come try this. And we were all kind of blown away, because we're like, wait, this is actually incredible. And we knew at that point, okay, there's something on this. So he started, graduating to larger machines and actually began roasting and selling coffee just to fund the work that we were doing and help kind of grow those efforts. But as that was happening, I was sending teams out weekly. I was going out to the strip clubs and on the streets, and I was getting really frustrated because we were seeing this issue of women mostly leaving the life and going through recovery programs and then hitting these barriers to reentry where they felt like they could not get a leg up. Many of them 11 to 15 years old is the average age of entry into exploitation. And many of them had not had the opportunity to complete education, had no professional work experience. Some of them had criminal records. And they were going through this healing journey. And then on the other side, they were lacking opportunities. And what was happening was they were coming right back to us. And with that, they were having higher levels of trauma. And they were also sending a message to others on the streets, like, don't try to leave. There's nothing else for us. And this is just the kind of those beliefs that I had in my life too. Like, this is what it is. This is the hand that we were dealt. And it was heartbreaking. And that was really the moment where my husband was like, we have to do something more. Like, let's take what we bring to the table and let's be a part of the solution to this problem that we're seeing. And so that's when we started our first coffee shop in Los Angeles.
That's so incredible. And what I love so much about your story, Jenny, is you didn't just start out and say, we're going to start a new business. You started out by just saying, we're going to focus on what's already happening. Let's educate ourselves. And to me, that's so important for all of us who are listening to hear, because we can all do something, right? Human trafficking, exploitation, all of these things. We hear these words kind of thrown around, like you shared at the beginning. We hear these words thrown around, and the reality is it's happening in our own communities. It's happening in our own families in a variety of different ways. And we all have a responsibility to be a part of the solution. But we don't have to necessarily found a nonprofit organization, or we don't have to start a coffee company, but we can start by just finding out what's already out there, educating ourselves, and just becoming advocates and supporters. That is so important. If you're enjoying this episode of the One Girl Revolution podcast, please subscribe today on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts. We have a new inspiring episode coming out every single week, and you don't want to miss a single one. Subscribe to the One Girl Revolution podcast today. But then on the flip side, when you have a good idea or you're already doing something like roasting coffee, for instance, you can turn it into something that really advocates for people. And that's what I love so much about your story, kind of all those different facets of it, because it's such a great example to all of us.
Yeah, and I think it's really important. I think, we didn't start with this idea of creating this massive company, right? It was just that question of what do we bring to the table and what can we do to make a difference? One of my favorite things is finding the seat on the bus for people. Like, I love looking around a room and seeing what skills people bring and plugging them into places. Early on, we didn't know. We're like, what do we? Well, we can show up, that's what we can do. And we can create networks and resources and things like that. And so through that, we met a lot of people that wanted to do something about the issue of trafficking, but didn't know how to get involved. And so I have a couple of memories. One of them was, meeting this grandma at a church service and her saying, I want to do something, but I don't know what I bring to the table. And so I asked her about herself and like what she liked to do and what her strengths were and things like that. And she's like, I don't know. She's like, I love being intentional. I always write notes to my grandkids and I'm always sending them little notes. And I said, then why don't you write notes to the women that we're reaching on the streets? And so she wrote all of these cute little grandma notes that we put in the gift bags, and we would go out on the streets and, we would actually tell the women, hey, there's a note from a grandma in there for you. And so many of them were just blown away by that simple act of kindness. And, they'd say, oh, I don't have a grandma, or wow, I miss my grandma, or things like that. And it just meant so much. We also had, a teenage girl who had been a survivor of trafficking, and she would knit scarves, and we would hand those out in the winter on the streets of LA, and we would say, hey, these were made for you by a survivor that actually overcame and found her way out of the life. And she's in freedom now. And that meant so much. So I think it's, I think a lot of times we're like, it has to be something grand, right? But we can do things just with everyday skills that we bring. And I think that's part of why we loved the idea of creating a coffee company, because we wanted to create something that people could be a part of. We started that first shop and realized pretty quickly that we would be limited in how many survivors that we could hire. And so that's when we reached out to a longtime friend who also had a skill set in business. And he had this dream to create businesses that were highly successful and highly impactful, and really prove that the two were not mutually exclusive. I think a lot of times people are like, if I want to make an impact, I got to go nonprofit route. If I want to be successful, I got to go the business route. And he was like, that's not true. And so, we called him to the table to bring his skill set. And he asked, do you want to hire 5 or 10 survivors? And we said, we want to hire 1,000 at least. And, so he pivoted his life to make an impact and make a difference, and brought his skills to the table. And so that's, why we are where we are today, because we teamed up, my husband with his incredibly gifted skills in roasting coffee, and mine with the knowledge of the nonprofit and the anti-trafficking world, and Mike Glanz with his incredible business skills. And we made this team and began building from there. And now we're a really large coffee company that's doing incredible things.
You are doing such incredible things, and I want to talk about that. But first, let's talk about the name. I love the Bible verse, "Arise, little girl," which is a translation from the Arabic Talitha Koum. How did you get the name? How did you say, this is what we're going to call it, Talitha?
So we were actually wrestling with that for a long time. We're like, what do we call this coffee company? And I think our very first coffee bags we ever made had like our nonprofit name on there. And we're going back and forth, but we're like, we need something that nothing was clicking, right? And so we had a volunteer on our team, and she came and she was so nervous, but like somebody else had been like, just go show them what you have. And I think we had a team at that time of like 83 people, and she's like, I don't know, I'll bring it forward, but I don't know what's going to happen. But she brought me like this little logo she had made and the name, and I just cried, because I'm like, that's it. That is exactly what we're doing. And she was so excited. And she's like, really? You like it? And I'm like, yes, that's it. Because, Talitha Coum it's that story of Jesus speaking over this little girl and saying, maiden arise, and bringing her from death to life. And that's exactly what we want to do. We want to see these, women coming out of this place of death and destruction and hopelessness, and really rising into hope and opportunity and potential, and realizing their dreams, and chasing after the story that they personally want to write.
We have a documentary at One Girl Revolution called The Girl Inside, and your story reminded me so much of it, because I had started One Girl Revolution probably a year or two before we filmed this documentary. And we had the opportunity to go into Cook County Jail, so the largest jail in the US, and interview 5 incarcerated women, not about what they did to end up in Cook County, but about who they are. And so I started out by telling them, One Girl Revolution, we're this multimedia platform, this nonprofit enterprise. We want to highlight the stories of women and girls. And the one word that they latched onto was girl. And prior to that, Jenny, I had gotten like a little bit of flack from people, because they were like, oh, it should be one woman revolution.
Uh-huh.
And I fought back. I was like, no, I think it's like there's something that's unifying around the word girl for women and girls. And
Yeah.
they latched onto that word, Jenny, and they just started talking about when they were little girls. They had these
Mhm.
hopes and dreams, and, the world was their oyster. They could do anything. It was before they had traumas in their lives, before they had difficulties and, suffered terrible, terrible things. And I think that that's such a powerful thing for all of us to think about. And that's why I love that scripture verse so much, Talitha Koum. Like, if we think about like who we were created to be, how much differently we would live our lives. Who is that little girl, and really revisiting that even as women.
Yeah, that's so powerful. I think a lot of times society, people, us, we look at people and it's easy to get caught up in judgment and, think, oh, why are you making such poor decisions? Or how did you end up in this place? Or you're doing terrible things, and get really hung up on those questions and those perspectives. But there's always so much behind the scenes, right? Like, no girl working in a strip club was sitting down at 5 years old and saying, when I grow up, this is what I want to do. Right. No woman behind bars, was like, this is my dream for my life, but it's all of these things that kind of stack up and the things that life throws at you. And I think that oftentimes it's really, sometimes it's, there's the book, The Power of the Other. I think there's these things where it's really important to have those outside voices saying, nope, I see you, I believe in you, I'm calling out that potential in you, and kind of reminding, I've had so many conversations with victims that are actively being exploited and survivors, and asking, like, well, what did you want to do when you were a little girl? What were the dreams on your heart? And the response sometimes is like a jaded response, but oftentimes it's like almost this bashful thing of like, oh my gosh, how silly of me to think that like I could have done this, or like, and it's everything from like, I wanted to be an actress to I wanted to be a secretary, and it's sometimes it's the really simple things. But I think when you have somebody that comes alongside of you and says, yes, you can do that, like, do all that's in your heart, right? You can walk out and you can live those dreams. But in addition to that, like, I'm going to come alongside you and help create opportunities, and I'm going to champion that. I think that's so powerful. And they say it takes an average of 7 attempts to leave the life of exploitation, trafficking, all of that, like, for the victim to kind of gain that courage to take that step. And I believe wholeheartedly that that comes from the fear of the unknown, and just wondering, like, is there something on the other side? If I take this really bold step that changes everything, right? Is there hope on the other side of this? Is there opportunity on the other side of this? And I think it's important, one, to create those opportunities for other people. And I think it's important to show that there is something, there is hope, because if there isn't an answer for that, then it just becomes this cycle that people can't break free from.
So Talitha is way more than just a coffee company. Can you talk about Talitha and all the great work that you're doing? And I know there are multiple facets to the work that you're doing. Can you talk about it as a whole?
So, like I said, we started out with this coffee shop and realized quickly, okay, we're going to be limited and in how many survivors that we can hire. And we've been a small part of so many phases of the anti-trafficking movement, right? We've dabbled in awareness and prevention and outreach and all of these different things. But the area that we kept seeing that gap was in that re-entry phase. And that is one of the most vulnerable phases. There's also a phase where people are re-triggered. All of those fears kind of begin to come back up. It can be really traumatic, and it can be this point of like, here I am on my own trying to figure out how to make it. And so we really created Talitha because we wanted to be a part of that movement, that next phase of the anti-trafficking movement as a whole, and to be an answer to the problem that we were seeing. And so today, Talitha, we've acquired multiple companies, and we have combined the roasting operations of multiple roasteries in San Diego all into one. We have multiple cafe spaces operating under a few different names. And what we do is that we provide employment to survivors first, that come from referrals through our Talitha Survivor Care Network. We provide coffee training. We have we have a San Diego Coffee Training Institute, and that will expand with us as we expand across the nation as well. And we also have the Talitha Survivor Care Network. So with that network, what we're doing is we're making sure the pieces are in place for survivors to successfully reenter society. So everything from housing, therapy, reunification with children, legal services, support groups with other survivors, and all of those pieces. And we're kind of pulling people together so that we're all a part of this movement of creating opportunities. I think that that part has been really exciting because we see people in that network working together. We see opportunities if we have a survivor and they lose their housing or they need additional services, we're able to come in and say, here are people that we can refer to you to that we deeply trust. And it's one thing to offer a job, but all these other pieces have to be in place as well.
It's just so incredible, like the multifacets to what you're doing, because it's so important for us to think about that. Survivors, you don't just leave like you shared. It's so important for us to build community around survivors, and we all know them. They're all in our lives. And so finding opportunities that we can just show support and build community around people is so critical, especially in that critical phase, right? Especially when they're leaving a situation that we need to build support around them. And I think it's so incredible that you utilize this company to really create an outlet for freedom in so many different ways for these individuals. Jenny, is there a story or two? This podcast is all about stories. Is there a story or two that you can share about someone who kind of came through Talitha? So somebody who came to work with you, and maybe someone who really you feel like is a great example of the power of the work that you're doing?
I think one of the most exciting parts of my job is to just sit with our survivor staff and to hear, their dreams and see them discover their dreams, and also just know like, hey, you did it, so that means I can too. I think it would be so easy for me to have ended up in a completely different place from where I am now. I think just being able to be an example to other survivors is really exciting for me. And so I love to sit and hear what's on their heart and what their dreams are. We have one of our survivor staff came to work with us and had never done anything like in the coffee industry. She's also working, sometimes parts of her job are like on the more technical side of things. And she discovered, I have a passion for the tech stuff. Like I want to learn how to, go on and to do like web design. And so now we're plugging her in with classes that she can do, things like that. We've had survivors come through Talitha that have now gone on to work with nonprofits and pursue educational opportunities and get degrees and things like that. And then we have another survivor that was one of our very first survivors that we hired. And she's a mama now. And she, we were able to throw like an online virtual baby shower, and she's getting ready to move into her first apartment and things like that. And so, I think it's just really meeting people exactly where they're at in their journey and being a part of that. And just knowing, some people will continue to work on with Talitha. We bring them through a process when they come on with us. And it's, everything from like, how do you show up to work on time in the very beginning, and like kind of through that process, pulling out leadership and initiative. And, some of them will go on to work with us for a long time and to kind of, career path into leadership positions, or stay on in different, areas with Talitha. And others will launch out and pursue careers and education and go into nonprofit work or start their own business. We hear all kinds of things, everything from I want to be a mom, to I want to open a salon one day. And it's really fun for us to come along and be like, okay, then what are the things that we're putting in place to help you get to that point, and seeing that dream and believing in it with them, but then also bringing in the skills and moving them into positions where they can be successful in pursuing those dreams.
Watch our Emmy-nominated documentary series featuring The Girl Inside and In Tandem on our website or on our YouTube channel today. Check out onegirlrevolution.com. That's the number onegirlrevolution.com today. And please subscribe to our YouTube channel for our documentaries, videos, and podcast episodes. Dreaming is so important for every single person. And I think we all can relate to going through something difficult in life And it's really hard to see that light, to see that ability is something, or possibility. Those are some words that come to mind as you're speaking, where we need to create these spaces for individuals. I, of course, like through One Girl Revolution, care so deeply about women and girls having those spaces really to dream and see what is possible, and see through examples like yourself. And I know so many others throughout the Talitha community are such examples too, to the women who are coming in for the first time and seeing, wow, what's possible, that they could do anything, and just to dream again.
As we set out and we started talking about what is our messaging, who are we as a company? It was everything from being hope roasted to how do we create opportunities for people to join in what we're doing, and really wanted every single customer, every employee that works for us to feel like they were a part of this movement as well. And so, as we're doing ongoing trainings with our staff to really make sure that we're creating environments that are safe and supportive for survivors, that our staff are feeling like advocates. And every survivor staff that we actually have, they don't feel like they are a client, or a part of like, oh, I'm here as a charity case or things like that. It's really neat to hear them talk about how they are a part of this movement too. And that they are, by showing up to work, they are creating opportunity for other survivors. And that's really a mentality that we try to instill. Every survivor that comes to work with us, we really say that it's a need to know basis as far as them being a survivor. So we only have the staff, the leadership in place that need to know in order to create supportive care management responses for those survivor staff. But outside of that, they just get to be somebody showing up to work, and they get to share their story if they want to, and they don't have to if they don't want to. That's also why we really make sure that all of our staff are trained in and trauma informed, and what does trafficking look like. That way, in case something ever happens with somebody but nobody knows that they are a survivor, everybody in the workplace knows how to respond.
So I know that you teased that you've grown so much, and you teased that you're going to be working little by little, I'm sure, across the country. Where do you hope that Talitha goes from here in your dream of dream worlds, Jenny? And what impact do you hope that Talitha can have on the world?
Yeah, so we have really we used San Diego as our proof of concept. It's one of the beverage capitals of the world, and it's just such a great place to start a business like this. There's a lot of incredible progress happening with anti-trafficking in the San Diego area, so we really wanted to model it out there. But we want to have 100 facilities in 25 marketplaces across the nation, at least. We want to create employment opportunities for at least 1,000 survivors, and have indirect impact through our Talitha Survivor Care Network to at least 10,000 people. It's funny because we threw that number out of 10,000 survivors and having kind of that indirect impact through our care network early on. But, this year we began to look at our numbers, and we're like, we're going to surpass that so quickly, just because the survivors that are the nonprofits that are coming to the table to partner with us. And as we're all reporting our numbers in of what we're doing, it's going to grow much faster than that. We're actually looking at secondary marketplaces now as we're getting ready to expand, but we know that we're going to be nationwide. We want to have a really strong e-commerce presence, right? We want to have, people don't just have to come to one of our coffee shops or be a wholesale customer, but people can also get subscriptions and order Talitha coffee to their homes as well. And so these are all things that we have in place, but we're kind of building and expanding on as well.
Well, I can't wait to see where you go from here, and continue to follow and continue to drink your coffee because it's so delicious. But for people that are listening that want to get involved, I know buying your coffee, subscribing to your coffee is one easy way. How can people support your work, and what can they do to get involved?
Yeah, so yes, they can. They can sign up for a coffee subscription. It's super easy. They can get coffee to their home as much as they want to. I know we go through a lot of coffee in our house. And they can also sign up for a wholesale account. So if people have a business, whether it's an office or a restaurant, grocery store, Whatever it is, we can provide wholesale coffee to businesses as well, and really create partnership opportunities there. And our Talitha Survivor Care Network is open. We would love to have more people join on into that. Through that network, we're also bringing on business partnerships as well if people want to become other places that employ survivors. We also do revenue share models to help bring strength to partnerships. So there's a lot of ways to engage. But yeah, we have that really high emphasis that every single person that partners with us, whether it's on a partnership level or as a customer, everybody's a part of making this happen. And every purchase that they make really is bringing change to lives.
I loved that you brought up that even companies can get your coffee on wholesale. So what an easy way for any company that's listening to raise awareness, to support the great work that you're doing, and also just encourage all of their employees to take a stand and speak up about human trafficking. Jenny, if you could get to the very root of why you do what you do every single day, I know there's so many positive stories that you see every single day, but I know you're also dealing with real struggles, real difficult stories. And there are some days probably where you feel like, why am I doing this? Or beating your head against the wall when things don't go the way that you hoped or planned. But if you could get to the very root of why you do what you do, the driving force of what you do every single day, what would you say that root is?
Yeah, I think that there are two things. One of them is that I do believe that we can see an end to trafficking. I absolutely firmly believe that. I think it's easy to get disillusioned and think that this issue is so huge and it's never going to end. And it's been around as long as the world's been around, like exploitation is a thing that's been around for a long time. But I think, if we work together and people bring their strengths to the table and we kind of join forces, we really can see an end to trafficking. And I think that excites me. I think collaboration excites me, seeing an end to something that has been a tragedy and a thing that has gripped and claimed so many lives like that. I want to be a part of ending that. I want to be a part of seeing being the solution to that. I think the other thing that really keeps me going though is that, like I said, I've done this for almost 15 years. There are a lot of faces and names that are tied to everything that I do. Every aspect of the nonprofit work that I do and the business work that I do, there's a name and a face that inspired every component, right? And there are people that I think of, and some of those are stories of victory, and some of those are really tragic stories that have deeply impacted me. But every single one of those names and faces really motivate me because I see this as an opportunity to impact individual lives, and every individual life has so much value and potential. I know that people who were reaching out to me and leaving their doors unlocked and creating, calling out the value and potential in my life, they had no idea that I was going to go on to be a part of starting a company that was so large, and they had no idea where I would end up. They were just so convicted and calling out my potential. And I see it as an opportunity. Every single life matters so much. And it's important that there are people that are highlighting that and calling that value out and believing in others and making that impact.
We can all do something. And whether it's buying your coffee, I always talk about in this podcast, the free and easy way to support any cause or raise awareness is to use your social media to share. So I hope that everybody who's listening follows Talitha, follows you and all the great work that you're doing, and also just shares, because you never know who might see it or who might need it, need to hear about the resources that are available, or need to read the statistics about human trafficking to make it real. I think a lot of times, as we've talked about in this episode, people think, oh, it's something that happens overseas. It doesn't happen here. And the reality is it's happening everywhere in our own communities, in our own families. It's happening everywhere. And we all need to do something, no matter how big or small, to be the change that we want to see.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Jenny, you are a one girl revolution. And that's why I wanted to have you on the podcast to share about your incredible story and the incredible work that you're doing. But who is a woman or girl that inspires you? Who is a one girl revolution in your life?
Yeah, I think a couple names come to my mind. I think first, Carolyn Leaf is amazing. I am an absolute neuroscience nerd. um, a lot of times people see the situation of trauma and they think that people are kind of always going to be a victim and hindered by the trauma that they've experienced. And there's been so much progress in the neuroscience world proving that that's not true, that our brains can be regenerated, that there is absolute hope, that we can see, science line up with actually what the Bible says, and we can see people completely restored and redeemed in that way. And so Carolyn Leaf, she definitely inspired me to kind of go down that path of neuroscience. The other person would definitely be Christine Kane. She was somebody who saw an issue and saw a challenge and just showed up. And she didn't take no for an answer. I definitely appreciate that because I am definitely wired in that way where I'm like, I don't see a mountain in front of me. I'm like, there's a way around it, through it, over it. We'll figure it out. But I don't like to take no for an answer either. I'm like, we're going to get through this. And so, yeah, that's definitely marked her life. And she was, somebody who maybe wasn't seen as a likely candidate for bringing as much change and impact as she has, but she has not only shaped a lot of lives, but she has also been such a key and crucial part in forming and directing the anti-trafficking movement.
She is a one girl revolution. Both of those women are one girl revolutions. And I love that part of the show where we can elevate women's stories and their voices because, there are, each of us have the power to be a one girl revolution and we need to be reminded of that. But we're also surrounded by them in our own lives and in the things that we're doing. So thank you for giving those shout outs. The last question that I always end this podcast on, Jenny, so I'd like to ask you is if you could leave women and girls around the world with one message, what would it be?
Definitely that you can do it. I think that we live in a time where there is so much comparison. There is so much pressure. And I think that it's really easy to kind of give into that. It's really easy to feel overwhelmed and kind of think, I'll never measure up, or I would never be capable of doing these things, or I can't reach those dreams that are on my heart. But you can do it. Believe in yourself, surround yourself with other people who believe in you as well. Find those people who champion that power that's in you, and you absolutely can do it.
You are such an example of that, Jenny. And I'm so grateful to have had you on the podcast. Thank you for all the great work that you do. I will be sure to put your websites, your social media, all the different ways that people can get in touch with you, all the different ways that people can support your great work, buy your coffee, all of the things in the show notes. But thank you so much, Jenny, for being on the One Girl Revolution podcast. And thank you for all the incredible work that you do.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
For more from One Girl Revolution, to listen to all of our podcast episodes, watch our Emmy-nominated documentary series, follow us on social media, donate to our nonprofit organization, and more, please visit onegirlrevolution.com. That's the number onegirlrevolution.com.